We shall now move on with the program. Vincent van Gogh once said, "Great things are done by a series of small things brought together." Today we bring together great minds to enlighten us about unleashing the power of philanthropy. For this, I welcome Mr. Chandrasekhar D., President, Madras Dyslexia Association, Mr. Lakshmi Narayanan, ex-Vice Chairman, Cognizant, Mr. Mohana Shankara Shiva Prakasan, Head, Health and Technology Incubation Center, and Mr. M.M. Murugappan, Executive Chairman, Murugappa Group. And to join them in conversation, I welcome Professor Nagarajan, IIT Madras, Class of 1981. I request the dignitaries to kindly join us on stage for the program.
Good afternoon. Looks like Madhu has handed over the mantle of standing between you and lunch to me. So, so welcome to this panel on unleashing the power of philanthropy. First, a quick announcement. Sri Lakshmi Narayanan is unfortunately not with us today due to no fault of his. I understand there was a little bit of miscommunication, and so he's not here. But we still have a very distinguished panel, and we'll try to do justice to the topic. Before I unleash the power of the panel on you, I just want to make a few brief remarks to set the stage. Philanthropy, to paraphrase Shakespeare, it's a quality that, blesseth him that gives and him that receives. But I don't think philanthropy was I think it's an evolutionary quality. If you go back to the original cavemen who went out and hunted dinosaurs for food, I don't think they would have taken kindly to, somebody coming and asking them for a piece of the dinosaur. They would have said, go and hunt your own bloody dinosaur or something like that. Because I think the emphasis was on self-preservation, obviously. But as communities formed, as society formed, humans started to recognize the need for giving and for sharing. Again, probably originally from a sense of self-preservation, because as you develop inequalities in society, one way to address these inequalities without revolution happening is to make sure that you share your wealth, your resources, and probably that is how philanthropy got started. But as you move up the evolutionary scale and our basic needs are satisfied, I think we started doing philanthropy for reasons other than self-preservation and self-interest. And I think that today we are in a situation where philanthropy is well entrenched among all of us. And so the topic of the day is, how do you unleash the power of philanthropy? In a sense, I guess the government of India has done that with corporate philanthropy through the CSR mandate. But the question that we can still ponder is, how do you unleash the power of individual philanthropy? Is there a need to do it? Are we already in a situation where philanthropy that is present is sufficient to serve society's needs? And also, I think the recipients of the benevolence are now much more diverse. It used to be that people used to give to poor people, the disadvantaged, and be happy with that. But now we have many more players on the stage clamoring for a share of the pie, so to speak, including, of course, academic institutions. For example, at IIT Madras, we have seen that in the past decade, there has been almost a 100x increase in charitable contributions to the institute. Almost 70% of that coming from donors based in India. Dr. Kiran Bedi made an impassioned plea for giving back, and of course, many alumni are already doing that. But at the same time, you have to ask the question, what should be the share? How much? Obviously, the academic institutions are making the argument, the old argument, that it's better to teach someone to fish rather than giving them fish. And certainly, academic institutions are in a great position to teach people how to fish, among other things. So it is a very legitimate cause, but at the same time, given the fact that philanthropy is growing, and there is also many people that are wanting to be beneficiaries of philanthropy, where do we go from here? If I'm a donor or a corporate, how do I decide how to apportion my benevolence? I think these are interesting things to ponder. We have a panel here that is certainly would be an insult for me to try and introduce them, but I guess that's one of the things that as moderator I do have to at least make an effort to do so. Sri Murugappan, of course, is well known to everyone here, and he is, I think in this context, the point that I might want to focus on is his role in the foundation, the AIM Foundation, and the work that is being done through that. Dr. Mohan Shankar Sivaprakasam is a faculty member at IIT Madras in the Department of Electrical Engineering, and he's also one of the new breed of faculty that are not satisfied with just teaching and doing research in labs. His focus has been on commercialization of technologies, on incubation of new products and services to benefit people. And so he will have some very interesting perspectives as a receiver and potential receiver of philanthropic contributions. And we have D. Chandrasekhar, who wears many hats. He is the secretary of the IIT Madras Alumni Charitable Trust. He's also the president of the Madras Dyslexia Foundation, and he's involved in many other charitable initiatives, both as a giver as well as a receiver. I'm sure they all have very interesting perspectives on this topic. So maybe what I will ask them to do is to kind of reflect on their own experiences or brushes with charity and with giving and receiving, and maybe ask them to kind of tell us how has philanthropy evolved over time, particularly in the Indian context, and where do they see it going in future? So we'll start with Sri Murugappan.
Well, thank you, Nagarajan, and thank you, IIT, for alumni, for inviting me here. But I must first tell you something very personal about this subject. This is very dear to me. I am a recipient of great philanthropy, and none other than my friend DC, who's sitting in my far left. Our younger son was dyslexic, and we never thought that he would get through school. But thanks to the MDA, the Madras Dyslexia Association, they spent time with him. The school was very supportive. Today, he is a sports film producer. He's got a business of his own, and he has aspirations, and he does things that I cannot imagine. DC, thank you very much. So quite honestly, institutions in this world have been created by great vision and great philanthropy. And I think it's not just the power of giving, Nagarajan, it's not just the power of wealth. Wealth is important. The need to share wealth is important. And I ask myself 3 questions. What do you want to do? How do you want to do it? And very typical of these TED Talks, why do you do what you do? I think each one of us inherently or innately feel that we want to make the world, a better place to live in. And therefore, we give our time, and perhaps from a corporate perspective, and this is a history that we have as a foundation and a family of over 120 years, to say, how do we share with society? And to me, any institution that has to be built, nurtured, enhanced, has this element of philanthropy. And philanthropy to me is not giving of money, and that's not it at all. I think it's a question of giving your time, giving your expertise, and sharing your thoughts with a bunch of people who you think can make a difference. And there are many stories in my life that I've been greatly touched by the philanthropy that we have been involved in personally as a foundation over so many years. But clearly, the power of philanthropy really comes from the heart, and it comes from the innate desire to serve society and make the world a better place to live in. This might sound as motherhood statements, but try it, greatest satisfaction.
Mohan?
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. So, in fact, when I was just listening to Mr. Murugappan, I don't know whether you remember, the first philanthropy that I received as part of the HTIC Center was the call you made to Wheels India, Srivat's Ram at the time, saying that you got to give these two things, which we were building a mobile cataract surgery unit, and I actually have some stories to share. And I was just telling him, he was a board member at the time at IIT Madras, he made a call and Srivat's Ram either said that immediately or you get an email saying, you will get an invoice but just ignore that invoice. Right? So in fact, that's the first thing that happened, I remember. To give you some background of why I'm in this panel to some extent, is when I came back about 10 years ago and joined the faculty of IIT Madras, I wanted to do medical technologies because we're importing like 90-95% of medical technologies, which has become significant now. And when I wanted to do this, when I was having these conversations with hospitals, doctors, government and ecosystem, one of the things that you quickly realize is in a space which is spread across multiple disciplines and multiple components of the society, it is very difficult for government, which is where you get your research funds and I dare say even academic institution, to actually support you enough to cover this vast space, which is usually about 5 to 7 steps. And that's one of the first things that we quickly realized. And said, okay, then you have two options. Either you continue the traditional way, you do research, and then you wait for these things to get commercialized later, which usually is very inefficient process in healthcare because it's not completely market-driven. Market forces are not fully in play to set up an equilibrium. And the second thing is, it's just too many things that you need. So we decided to set up a center, which is the Health Technology Innovation Center right now. And the way the center has evolved is probably one of the very few centers in the country which gets its most 60 to 70% of its funds from other than government. It's a very rare situation. And that happened because of people who have quickly realized that in an area like healthcare, where the market is either not fully formed or risks have to be taken, or where the gestation period is long. So these are the reasons where people have quickly realized and started putting in funds. The first project which we did was a mobile cataract surgery unit, and you quickly realize, you write a proposal like that to the government, it will never get funded, right? Because there's just too many risks involved to actually make it happen. So Professor Anant was the director at that time, he was also the guy who recruited me, and I was bugging him saying that, we have to build this unit, and which Shankar Nethraliyas, remember, philanthropy just doesn't come from just us alone. There were so many pieces attached to it. I told him we need to build this unit and we don't have money. Right? And he said that, oh, that's surprising. You can't start a project without that. I said, we need these 2 vehicles. We had done the design and everything. And I go to his office at 7 o'clock in the evening. I said, you need to call somebody to get us these 2 vehicles. He says, no, we'll talk about this later. I said, no. I've spoken to you multiple times. You need to give me an answer right now. I had much courage at that time, right? Walking to the director's office. And he calls Mr. Sesh Sai of Ashok Leyland, who he happened to know. And within about 3-4 minutes of conversation, he says, Sesh says he will give you this vehicle at a very discounted price. Right? In fact, that seeded, in one way, when we go back, so today the center has become one of the leading medtech centers in the world, globally visible, and we have done technologies that have reached and benefited probably millions of people. And in fact, I was looking at what the center is going to do the next 3 years. It's going to touch almost 3 to 5 million people annually in every year. And the first project really started this way, and that actually set the tone in many people pitching in making these things happen. And what was Professor Anant is here somewhere, I can't see him. He's here. So what was supposed to be a discount later actually turned into a donation when the surgical unit really did well, and you'll be very happy to know that there are about close to 11,000 surgeries that have been completed in rural areas which simply will not be able to access. And that's what really started the thing, and after that many people pitched in at various levels. Then the word started spreading, and one of the latest we had was Mr. Lalit Mahajan of 1968 Chemical Engineering. And one of these Saturdays, he just visited the center in one of these alumni meetings, and what started as a 10-minute conversation turned into a 5-hour discussion. And he said, we should do this, and today, thanks to him, we have developed an indigenous technology for the first time, a point-of-care technology that is coming out of India, with probably will benefit about 5 to 10 million people every year. It's already in the market. And I can tell you many stories. Chris Gopalakrishnan's CCBR, which actually has turned into a center of all the neuroscience activities in IIT Madras. So I have been a great benefactor, and I hope there will be a time when I may be able to give this back at such significant levels. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mohan. By the way, I also want to mention that one of the original contributors to the Mobile Eye Surgical Unit project was the batch of 1975 alumni of IIT Madras. Anybody here from the 75 batch? Thank you. Thank you so much. They also provided seed funding at that time. DC?
Good morning. I first thank Mr. Murugappan for this public acknowledgement. And for the benefit of those who are not familiar with dyslexia, dyslexia is a condition that affects about 10 to 15% of the school-going children. These children are intelligent, and they have average to above average intelligence, which is about 85 plus, but they can't learn in a school environment. It's because these children are differently intelligent. See, the school environment demands a lot of linguistic and mathematical logical intelligences, and they have little less of it, but they have a lot of intelligence in music, visual spatial, bodily kinesthetic, interpersonal, intrapersonal, and naturalistic. So if we can only tap those intelligences, then they can be excellent. And this is what we are doing. We use a technique called multisensory teaching. That is, we use visual, audio, kinesthetic, and tactile method of teaching to turn around these children. We have brilliant examples of what we have done. And our next newsletter is bringing a complete review of all the successful dyslexic people whom we have turned around in the last many years. We are a 26 years old organization. Thank you very much for that. Coming back to philanthropy, I got inducted into it very early in my life because I studied in the Ramakrishna Mission School, where the fundamental belief is those who live for others alone live. So with that background, we started off. So wherever there has been an opportunity, we have tried to do something. And we saw a big opportunity at IIT. So I'm very proud to be one of the founder trustees of the IIT Madras Alumni Charitable Trust, which has now set up a development office. And in the current year, we have been able to raise 75 crores, which I am told is about the highest that any IIT has raised so far. And this has gone to some very meaningful projects with the guidance of Professor Nagarajan. And now, if I look at my, I have been at it last about 30, 35 years. It used to look like a favor when people were doing philanthropy, but it's no longer. People are willing to look at you as an enabler. All the philanthropic organizations are being looked at as enabler. This morning, Dr. Kiran Bedi gave the example of the JCB people coming and helping her to solve a social problem. We have a very similar situation. Some corporates have come and given us money to conduct training. That money we are using it on government teachers who will find it very difficult to break the system and find the money and to take training from us. So this is another, everybody is now looking at the philanthropy organizations, if they are well run, as an enabling organization.
Thanks, DC. Given the time constraints, I'll just pose a couple of questions to the panel and then open it up to the floor. I want to thank Sri Murugappan for defining the scope of philanthropy to include the 3 T's, as I call it: time, talent, and treasure. One of the things that we find is that the people that want to give, some want to stay involved. Once they make a contribution, they still want to give that time as well to see how the funds are utilized and what are the outcomes and so on. Whereas there are other people who just want to give you the money, get out of the way, and let you do what you want to do with it. From a donor's perspective, do you have any sense of what do you think? Who do you think is a more noble donor? Is it somebody who just wants to give the funds and let you do what you want to do with it, or someone who wants to get involved at a later stage also? And personally, I'm sure that in your case, we know that you do give off your talent and your time very, very generously. But in general, what is your take on this?
I don't think there's anything such as, a donor is a donor. When you give your money, yes, I think a donor who wishes to give money is also a noble donor. But it's always good to stay involved. I think it's good to stay involved because of the impact that you make. Because when you make that impact and when you're able to assess that impact, and through your time, talent, as also money, that you're able to enhance that impact. That, I think, is very critical, because that impact has some kind of an effect that spreads exponentially. Because we've had situations where people have come to us and said, we've studied in your institutions, we are in good jobs right now, or we have started our own businesses, but we want to do something more for society. So a donor just providing money is useful, but I always say provide money to the institution which has very, very sound values. But staying involved, I think, is even more useful, because that really provides a greater impact to society.
Thank you. So Mohan, given the fact that for every benefactor there are probably 10 competing beneficiaries, how do you present a value proposition to the potential donor?
So what I have seen is okay. So I'm going to give you a slightly different answer. I actually have not made any pitches, so to speak. I usually tell them the entire story. This is what it is. These are the gaps, and these are the reasons why. I will limit my thing to this context, which is why government funding alone or the institute funding alone is not enough. And this is all I did, and this is the same thing which I did with Professor Anand, and that was what it was. But I think you still do have to tell them, because at the end of the day, the donor also needs to feel the value is differentiated. It's not the product differentiation type of value. Why can this not be given to anybody else? Or why can't somebody else do this also? So that part, that homework we have to do. And being in healthcare in the context of India today, you're importing 90% of 45,000 crore worth of stuff. that's a significant thing. And we explain to them as to why the government cannot take a risk beyond certain thing, and why time also. You talked about the donation, money, time, and there's also a timeliness of the money. In fact, if I were to say what the call to Mrs. Eshisai and the call to Srivats Ram had made, we needed something that week, in 2 weeks, for this to happen. So the timeliness of that, all these things are fundamentally based on the value of the work which you do. And if that's presented, I've always found that Indians have an intuition which quickly figure out who is what, and they can do it. This is what I've seen at least.
DC, I think you have done fundraising for a variety of causes. I think the omnipresence of social media today, it's obviously a two-edged sword, but particularly when you're trying to do fundraising for causes, do you think that social media can play a key role, particularly I think the ones who are sitting on the fence, who want to give but haven't quite made up their mind, who haven't written their first check. I think what we have found in our experience is once somebody gives once, they like the experience so much, they become repeat donors. It's that first donation that's the most difficult to get out of people. Do you think that there is a way to, in your experience, is there a way to leverage social media to really push them over the edge, so to speak?
Yeah, social media gives you the reach. Social media and also gives you the visibility. So today we are using both the print, electronic and the social media together. So the print and electronic media give us the visibility, that backed up by the appeals through social media, it is bringing, but it's going to take some more time. We are still dependent heavily on that same Pareto principle, 80-20. So most of the money comes from a handful of donors, but a lot of people are now in the social media. Recently we are taking part in the Battle of the Buffet that's coming up next week. So we did have about more than 150 new donors coming through a crowd platform. We tried that.
So I have just one more question for Sri Murugapan and then I'll turn it over to the audience. One thing we find is that many Indian corporates are making fairly large contributions, particularly to academic institutions outside India. So this is a question I have to ask from an IIT Madras viewpoint. What is it going to take to convince Indian corporates to do similar contributions to Indian institutions, and what is holding them back, in your opinion?
In fact, the same question was asked to me by Raghu, who was in the, while we were having a cup of coffee. And I had to make a small correction there, that it's not so much Indian corporates. There are individuals in corporate India who are making large contributions to institutions overseas. And I did explain to him in one case, which I am quite actively associated with, is that it was a personal passion of that individual and also a little emotional sentiment that his late mother, who was a writer, had to support humanities and the arts at an institution overseas. But having said that, I think institutions in India, and particularly institutions like the IIT, are no less capable and are no less eminent than many institutions overseas. And I think the most important thing that our institutions in our country can do is to get people to be associated with them. I always tell people, and particularly, in fact, even in our own group, when we have people or when we have my colleagues who want to do something or their families want to do something, I said, don't worry about donation. Come spend time in the institutions that we are involved with. Not necessarily sponsored by us, but institutions associated with us. Come spend time. Once you spend time, it's almost infectious. Because once you spend time and once you can make a difference in someone's life, it can be as little as creating livelihood. Creating livelihood. We have a rural research center, and I see Joseph Thomas at the back. And creating livelihood for somebody, however small it is, once you see that, it becomes infectious and then it proliferates. So, to answer your specific question, I think providing support to any institution is good, wherever it is in the world. Providing support to institutions in India is even more meaningful. But to ensure that the standards are of very, very high quality and the commitment of the institution is very high is equally important. So I cannot specifically say that it should not be provided to institutions in developing countries or developed countries. Maybe those institutions will also work in developing countries. So philanthropy is not something which is very specific to any geography. I think if philanthropy can make an impact to the world, I'm sure it impacts the geography of India as well.
Thank you. So questions from the audience? We have time for probably 3 questions.
I'll go with the first. There's generally a focus on large contributions when it comes to philanthropy, but increasingly, what are the initiatives which you may be aware of where the smaller contributions made by people on a more regular basis are highlighted, and how that can be enhanced?
I'm not supposed to, but as moderator, but I can quickly say what we are doing at IIT Madras. We have actually formed a club that we call GEM Club. GEMS, GEM, stands for Give Every Month. So we make sure that people understand that no contribution is too small. You are encouraged to give whatever you can, and encouraged to give it at whatever frequency you can. And our recognition process for a very small donor is no different from our recognition process for a very large donor. We make sure that they feel equally appreciated, and we make sure that we cultivate them, because one thing we have again found through our experience is today's small donor is tomorrow's large donor. So it's very important to understand that even though a person may have given a small amount today, it doesn't mean that they're going to keep giving small amounts. It's very, very likely that they will turn into a larger donors as they gain more familiarity with the institution, as they develop more trust in the processes that the institution has. So yes, I think it is very important to acknowledge and appreciate the smaller donors with the same fervor that we reserve for the larger donors.
Okay, I'm Gokul. Okay. First of all, I should thank this IIT Alumni Association, because we have a society called Engineers Without Border, and IIT has given a lots of potential in building the toilets and solar electrification and water. Thing is that currently the youth of our Indians or in IIT, it's a technology era. We are moving towards technology area, and it is people can give us lots of criticism rather than coming towards society. What kind of a strong message can be given by the philanthropy who's sitting there to turn up these kind of critics into the society, where students or youth can directly involve in creating a change in the society?
Mohan, do you want to take that from a faculty viewpoint?
So in general, what we are seeing in the student community right now is it's definitely much different and much more aware than when I was in college. I'm 38 right now, so I'm talking about 20 years ago. So I don't think there is a lack of this awareness and wanting to do something. And if at all, if you look at IIT Madras, probably the most energetic in terms of the socially relevant projects, what I would call healthcare, water, energy, and everything. So, I would say that that way of using technology, because see, one thing youngsters are aware and one thing they're comfortable with is, instead of the traditional way of societal intervention through NGO, which requires infrastructure, policy, operations, and logistics. So, for example, somebody in IIT Madras, I think it's already operational, or building a tool through which you can even pick which cost to give. Right? I think one of our faculty was driving it. Sorry, I'm not able to remember the platform's name. So technology is being used both for creating that interventions for society and for philanthropy for those interventions. It's happening already.
So, Shri Murugapan, based on your experience with IIT Madras Research Park, how do you think this whole ecosystem is working? The pipeline from innovation to incubation to startup to commercialization.
The research park, we are quite actively involved with. I think conceptually, it's brilliant. It's an excellent. The fact that it spawned many entrepreneurs is also very creditable. Where I think we are trying to do or trying to make an impact is, the entrepreneurs are not able to cross a threshold. Across a threshold from a concept to prototype to scale. And the prototype to scale is the big threshold they need to cross. They already think they have arrived. If they've made a prototype and a working prototype, etc., they think they've arrived. The answer is that to scale is completely different animal. And this is the challenge. I think the Deshpande Center is now working on this to see whether we can help such entrepreneurs to achieve scale. And of course, the funding is a whole new thing. But even scale in terms of a thought process is extremely important. So that's really where we are, I think, where we need to focus.
One more.
Yeah, sorry. Earlier, some of the corporates, for example, say the TVS Group or Murugappa Group, perhaps the Tatas, used to give without expecting anything back in return. But of late, especially after the mandate has come in of the 2%, some of the smaller companies and quite a few of the corporates, and they don't mention it, but they would expect their CSR initiatives to go into areas where they would expect a certain amount of coming back to, probably indirectly, to the business. Now, is this a concern, and is there any way that we can turn it to, I wouldn't use the word advantage, but to the benefit of the larger society than looking at the contributing group alone?
Saish, we don't expect anything. Let me make it very clear. But your experience obviously is otherwise, or your perception is otherwise. I respect that. The fact is, if we have any expectations, is no longer something that we are doing for society. One is a social responsibility. I think we need to understand that. It is our responsibility. It's not something that we can expect anything in return. Having said that, we have different stakeholders, and we need to serve communities around them. And therefore, many corporates, and we are no different, many corporates do choose to serve communities around stakeholders. Now, what is our expectation? Our expectation is that those communities are well served with whatever we do. If it so happens that those stakeholders value what we do and they continue to remain with us or within our ecosystem, we appreciate it. But it's not a strategy to keep them in our ecosystem. Because the moment you start doing it, what difference is it than marketing expenditure or development expenditure? I think we need to be very clear about this. This is a responsibility and not related just to the business. Yes, Mrs. Thorat wanted a question. Mrs. Thorat.
Yeah, maybe one more.
Sorry, it wasn't exactly a question, but I just thought I'd share a very unique way in which fundraising has been done by the Indian Cancer Society, where I'm a trustee. It is through a mutual fund. The mutual fund raises money from its high net worth individuals into a close-ended debt fund. The corpus remains with the mutual fund. It's a totally SEBI approved fund. And the dividend is then given for treatment of patients. It's scaled up from annually giving something like 4 crores about 6 years ago to later on 9 crores, and then now it's 15 crores per annum with a total 100% matching contribution by the HDFC group, which has actually sponsored this fund. It's an amazing way of fundraising, and all the due diligence and the governance structure, it's all explained even in the investment document. And so the whole process has proved to be extremely useful to the recipient as well, because we can plan our programs for the next few years. And in all likelihood, it gets rolled over and it enlarges. So in ways, it's predictable. It's something that allows you to allocate resources in a planned manner, and you're not running from pillar to post.
Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think I'm sure our development office is all ears. Also, I just want to quickly mention on the CSR front, our development office does make it clear to any corporate that wants to work with us that they cannot expect anything in return if it is to be a CSR contribution. Of course, it's still up to them whether they claim it as a CSR contribution or not, but at least from our side, we make it very clear to them that this is intended to be a socially responsible project. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Actually, we are over time by about 15 minutes, so I will bring the panel to a close at this time. Again, the panelists will be available for interactions during lunch, and let's thank our panelists again for the conference.
Thank you so much. We truly cherish all the words that you've shared with us today. I request Professor Nagaraj to please present our speakers with a token of appreciation. Thank you so much, sir. I now request Ms. Shubha to present a token of appreciation to Professor Nagaraj.